We are just over a week away from a boxing match that will see a legend return to the ring as Mike Tyson will face off with Jake Paul in Dallas on November 15th. Netflix will live stream the bout, and the digital streaming service also has a three-part documentary series titled Countdown Paul versus Tyson. First episode is available November 7th. So, joining me to talk about the fight and the doc is a man who is seen in the series. He is also a boxing play-by-play voice, the one and only Curran Bhatia. What's going on, Curran? How you doing, man?
What's going on, Dexter? I like that. One and only. Okay. I appreciate you giving
There
me
is
my
no
props.
one and only. We can't talk about another Curran Bhatia. We know. You've been up here many times. Everything's good?
Everything's good, man. Looking forward to this event. Speaking of one and only, Mike Tyson, one and only.
Yes.
Jake Paul, one and only. So I'm excited to chat with you about this.
I know you're excited about this. Now, Curran, I got to ask you this because having been involved in the documentary series where you are, what unique aspects of Jake Paul and Mike Tyson's training camps were revealed in here that you think viewers might find intriguing? You know, whenever you get that behind-the-scenes look at this, viewers really like that in boxing. What do you think they'll find intriguing?
Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson. Everyone is saying, what if? What's going to happen, right? So I think in the documentary, in Countdown, which is on Netflix, streaming now, I think you realize a little bit about each man's motivation, right? Why are they taking this challenge? So for Jake Paul, he wants to be taken seriously as a professional boxer, right? We know what Jake Paul has done as a social media influencer, as a YouTuber, as a former Disney star, right? So we've seen that. Then he got into boxing, and actually in the documentary, you learn a little bit about how he got started in the sport of boxing. For Mike Tyson, he was the baddest heavyweight in the world, undisputed champion, heavyweight champion in the late 80s and the early 90s. So we know everything that Mike Tyson did. Now, we know there was a little bit of a fall off in terms of what happened to him in his career. But in terms of cultural relevance, Mike Tyson has stayed culturally relevant, and people want to see what he's doing, see his next move. So Mike Tyson, I believe, is taking this fight for glory. He already has money. He's got businesses. He's a star, obviously, as we know. So I think Tyson's motivation is for glory and to continue to compete. And I think you see that in the documentary, and I think that'll play out in the live fight on November 15th.
Yeah, I think people are intrigued to see that. There's a lot of intrigue around this fight, and I think it's going to be very intriguing how it plays out, and just Mike Tyson, his return to the ring.
Correct.
As I said. So given the extensive coverage in the documentary, how do you think the portrayal of both fighters will impact the public perception ahead of this fight? Because I think there are some people that say, okay, Jake Paul, has been trying to take boxing seriously. He wants to be taken seriously, as you said, as a professional fighter. And then Mike Tyson, they're like, why is he coming back to the ring? Why is he doing this at 58 years old? So how do you think this doc will shape that public perception?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the documentary on Netflix is going to show people that both of these men, Mike Tyson and Jake Paul, are taking this extremely seriously. And one thing is what you learn about, like I said, the origins of how both men got into this sport. So I think people are going to say that, hey, Jake Paul really wants this. He wants to be a world champion in boxing. He wants that respect. He even said in the documentary, even if I beat Mike Tyson, people are still not going to give me that respect. And that might be true, right? So he needs to work his way up in boxing. Obviously, this is a massive event, and this would be a great feather in his cap to say, hey, I beat Mike Tyson. On the other side of it, I think we're going to look at the motivations for Mike Tyson that we talked about. And like I said, I think people are going to see both men training extremely hard for this. Mike Tyson actually said he's eating raw meat in preparation for this fight. He's not doing mushrooms during training camp. And actually, on that same theme, in the documentary, Jake Paul said, hey, boxing is the one thing where I had to be sober. I had to train because as a social media influencer in LA with all these big deals and things like that, Jake Paul said, hey, there's a lot of alcohol, there's drugs, there's people hangers on, there's people coming at you. Boxing is the one thing where you have to train seriously because otherwise you're going to compete in the ring, and we know what can happen when you're not fully trained and competing. So I think it's, like I said, I think the biggest takeaway is going to be both these men are taking it very seriously. And I think that's going to play into people watching this and say, hey, these guys are taking it seriously, so I want to tune in and see what happens. It has a huge what if factor. Yeah,
and what if people like that. People like the what if. They want to see what happens. Now, one thing, Curran, when you look at this doc, right, it does provide what I think some boxing fans want. You get that sneak peek into the psychological and physical preparations for both fighters.
Correct.
Could you share what their approaches are or how they may differ in the preparations psychologically and physically?
Yeah, in terms of preparations for Mike Tyson and Jake Paul. So Mike Tyson, we talked about, he's not taking mushrooms, he's eating raw meat. And I think a lot of it for Mike Tyson is that mental approach. Now, if you look at how Mike Tyson got into boxing, I'm sure you know this story, Dexter. There was a bully, and Mike Tyson had a pet pigeon. The bully snapped the neck of the pigeon, and that really motivated Mike. That was his first ever fight, and that kept him going. And now he says in preparation, I start to think about that bully, and as the fight gets closer and closer, that inside Iron Mike Tyson comes out. And so I think you learn a lot about the mental preparations for Mike Tyson and his motivations in that way. For Jake Paul, we talked about the motivations to be taken seriously as a boxer. But one thing you have to give Jake Paul credit for is his motivations and the actions that he's done as a promoter. And he's actually promoted on the undercard is going to be Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano. This is a rematch. That is a fantastic fight. Absolutely. Jake Paul co-promoted the first one. Huge fight in women's boxing. One of the top matchups between two of the top fighters in the sport, Amanda Serrano and Katie Taylor. In addition, Jake Paul has elevated fighters that are on the undercard. So, for example, Niraj Goyat from India is going to be on this undercard, so that adds a little global appeal. Bruce Shushu Carrington, who's actually a fighter out of Brooklyn, he's making his name. He's going to be on the undercard. So data actually shows that people who tune in, let's say from other walks of life, let's say you watch social media influencers, things like that, you start to pay attention to some of these undercard fighters. You follow them, their following goes up, and that can also help with their purses, and that's another thing that Jake Paul has helped with. Fighter pay, fighter equality, fighter pay. Jake Paul has helped with that. So, like I said, I think you learn a lot about the motivations of why both men are in the sport.
Yeah, and that's very interesting and also bringing more intrigue to why people might want to watch this fight on the 15th of this month. Now, there's always challenges in any bout. Curran, what are the key challenges that Mike Tyson faces in this matchup, considering what we talked about, his age, right? 58 years old, and how has he addressed this in terms of his training regimen? He is not training like we saw him during these Iron Mike Tyson days. He's now 58 trying to do this. So how is that a challenge for him, and how has he addressed that?
We have a saying in boxing, right? Father Time is undefeated. So we can't, there's no other way to put it. Mike Tyson is 58 years old. Jake Paul is 27 years old. And that is just the reality of the situation. One thing, the last thing to go for fighters is power. And of course, we know Mike Tyson is known for his power and knockout ability. So I expect that power to still be there. What might not be there is, let's say, timing and speed. I actually think Tyson's defense is probably going to be there as well. He's got good head movement. He's always had that with his peekaboo style. You need to have good head movement to accurately, correctly do that style. So I expect Mike Tyson's power to still be there. It's going to be difficult, though, because, like we said, Father Time's undefeated. So that means that Jake Paul, let's say he's a little bit faster. Tyson has more experience at this level, but Jake Paul maybe more recently has more experience in terms of big events, marquee events, right? Jake Paul has been doing these big marquee events more recently. Obviously, Tyson back in his heyday was doing these events. So those are all different things to think about. At the end of the day, like we said, Father Time undefeated, and you can't take away the fact that Mike Tyson is more than double the age of Jake Paul. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But those are the things that Mike Tyson is going to have to go against on November 15th.
He absolutely is going to have to go against that. Now, you brought up Jake Paul's professional boxing experience. When you look at that, it's relatively limited compared to traditional boxers, right? And even the experience of Mike Tyson. But based on the documentary, how has his camp prepared him to step up against a legend like Iron Mike Tyson?
So Jake Paul in this sport, right, he's fought a lot of different types of athletes. He fought NBA players. He fought former UFC champions. More recently, though, Jake Paul has fought experienced boxers who are in the same weight category, same age. And he actually did that 2 fights prior to the most recent fight. So he wants to make his name and fight, ranked fighters as he works up the rankings. He wants to become a legitimate world champion, and credit to him for doing so. So he's not only taking marquee events, but when a marquee event comes up, like this one, as you see in the documentary on Netflix, he is willing to take that because obviously these huge marquee events have that what-if factor. It's the highest level of sports entertainment, not necessarily the highest level of boxing competition, right? This isn't Terrence Crawford versus Canelo Alvarez, and I don't think anyone thinks it is, but it is the highest level of entertainment. And it's going to be on Netflix, which means that if you are a subscriber to Netflix globally, you can watch this fight. So there's not a big pay-per-view price tag, and there is a stellar undercard. So these are all things that come together for why this event is going to be as big as it is. It's at AT&T Stadium in Dallas, where the Cowboys play. So we know that this is going to be a big event. There's going to be a lot of different celebrities in the house, a great undercard, and obviously a marquee, huge, big-name main event.
Yeah, with the big name, should have a lot of eyeballs on that. A couple more things for me. One of the things I found interesting about about this fight is that Tyson and Paul, they'll be using 14-ounce gloves for this fight, just for the viewers that maybe don't know around boxing. But can you discuss how this might affect the dynamics of this bout?
Absolutely. So 14-ounce gloves are going to be used. Now, that means that could be safer for both men, for Mike Tyson and Jake Paul. The other big rule difference, this is a professional boxing bout. This is not an exhibition. This is a professional fight. Now, one other thing that I actually think is going to be more in play than the gloves is there's 8 2-minute rounds. So usually in men's boxing, especially at a championship level, you're used to 3-minute rounds, and sometimes it's 10 to 12 rounds. 8 2-minute rounds. Now, I actually think that's going to be really an interesting dynamic because the urgency is going to be there. If either man wants to get a knockout, there's less time to do so and less time in the round. So I actually think that could amp up the action. That could make it more exciting because you know you have less time to work. And I'm interested to see how Jake Paul makes that adjustment and how Mike Tyson makes that adjustment, because when Mike Tyson was fighting in his heyday, of course he was fighting in 3-minute rounds. So it'll be really interesting to see which adjustment that each man makes with those different rule sets.
Yeah, different rules are going to be very intriguing in this fight. Now, there's been a lot of talk, you mentioned this word, the entertainment value with this fight. So when you think about this, Curran, how do you balance what some people might look at this fight and say it's a spectacle, right? How do you balance the spectacle with the genuine competitive nature of this bout, and how do you balance all that?
This is sports entertainment at the highest level. It's not necessarily boxing competition at the highest level, and that's okay. It's sports entertainment. The point is to entertain you. And it does have the what-if factor. Dexter, when you go around and talk to people about this fight, some people say Mike Tyson's going to win, some people say Jake Paul's going to win, some people say knockout, and what that means is it has the what-if factor of what could happen, and that makes us want to pay attention. That makes us want to tune in. And you add a stellar undercard with competitive co-main event in Amanda Serrano, Katie Taylor, and their rematch. That was a fantastic first fight. So with all of those things, it has, yes, it's sports entertainment. We know what this is, but it's an interesting fight because of those different dynamics. And it's almost like back in the day, Dexter, I'm sure you played NBA Jam, right? Remember you had those attributes?
One of my favorite games.
There you go. And remember, sometimes you have that attributes bar, so you're like, all right, someone with a good handle, but maybe you don't have as good of a shot or good defense. And so in a way, it's like you look at Mike Tyson, all right, he has power, but he's a little bit older, so he might be slower. Jake Paul has maybe less experience than Mike Tyson, but he's younger. So it's like, it's interesting because you do all these different things and you say, all right, how is that now going to play out? We're going to find out November 15th.
We are going to find out. Last thing for me here, Curran. Two-part question for you.
Yes.
There's a lot of hype around this.
Yes,
Do you believe the fight will live up to its billing?
Yes.
And I won't ask you for a prediction, but how do you think this is going to play out, especially with the 8 rounds, 2 minutes, the difference of experience between these fighters? How do you think this plays out?
So in terms of living up to the billing, this will certainly live up to the billing of an event, right? A sports entertainment event that people want to tune in to see. I think this could actually break records, and the reason for that is it's not behind a pay-per-view wall. So if you look at, like, for example, one of the biggest pay-per-views of all time was Conor McGregor, the crossover fight versus Floyd Mayweather. That was reportedly 6.5 million buys globally. Now, we know that Netflix has about 275 million subscribers. And like we said, this is included in their subscription, and that's global subscribers. And so I could see a lot of people tuning into this fight because it isn't behind a pay-per-view wall. It's included in your Netflix account. So I could see a lot of people tuning in, and I do think it'll live up because of the stellar undercard, because of the what-if factor, because we're taking two, big names, Jake Paul and Mike Tyson, from two very, very different age groups, two different, they have different fans, and they're coming together. Two different eras, right, of superstars here coming together. So I think when you get the best of both in terms of, fans, it's spanning different fans groups. So I think because of that, it will live up to the billing. Now, in terms of how I expect this fight to play out, I think it's going to be a very interesting dynamic. And what I mean by that is if you go back and watch Mike Tyson's recent exhibition against Roy Jones. So Mike Tyson still had attributes of Mike Tyson. He had quick left hooks. He was working behind the peekaboo defense. The head movement was there. One thing you noticed was that Mike Tyson was missing Roy Jones with the left hook by this much. But the power seemed to be there, and it seemed like that aggressive come-forward ability was still there for Tyson. So I expect to see that on November 15th from Mike Tyson. So I think the first few rounds are going to be a very tough day in the office for Jake Paul. He's going to have to keep a motivated Mike Tyson off of him. And Mike Tyson's going to be moving forward, with that patented peekaboo style, trying to land a power shot. if Jake Paul can keep Mike Tyson off of him for the early rounds. I think it's going to be on Jake Paul to then turn it on, hope that Tyson slows down a bit, and then Jake Paul's going to have to step on the gas. Now, that's much easier said than done. I think Jake Paul is going to have to go through hell in those first few rounds to get to that point and hope that Tyson slows down, and then maybe Jake Paul can have success. But that's what's so interesting about it. So I'll close it off with this. Mike Tyson had a very famous quote, and I'm sure you're aware of this. Mike Tyson said, "Everyone has a plan until they get hit in the mouth." So the biggest question on November 15th is, what is Jake Paul going to do when he gets hit in the mouth? That's what we're going to find out November 15th on Netflix.
That is one of my favorite quotes. I use that all the time.
Yes.
When I can. And it should be a good one on November 15th as Jake Paul will battle Mike Tyson in Dallas. That'll be live on Netflix. There is a 3-part docuseries, Countdown Paul versus Tyson, available now. First 2 parts available November 7th. And then next Tuesday, the final part of the series comes out. So it should be a good one. That is Curran Bhatia. He will be out there at the fight in Dallas to take it all in. He's also in the docuseries that you can see, Countdown Paul versus Tyson, to give you more breakdowns on these great fights and the 2 fighters there. So it should be an intriguing one. I know you'll be there. I will be watching. Appreciate you coming through and talking about this great fight. Thank you, man.
Dexter, thank you so much for the time. Hey, we got to get an NBA Jam game in at some point. I didn't know you were a fan.
Hey,
I love
huge
it.
fan. Anytime we get NBA Jam, it's great. I've had the guy who's the voice behind it, Tim Kitzrow. He does the vocals for my basketball show.
Wow. Okay.
So, yeah,
the Boom Shakalaka guy?
He does
amazing.
That. Amazing.
Wow.
So, you know, that's how much I love NBA Jam.
I love
so that's
it.
good. Curran Bhatia, folks. Thank you so much, Curran. Appreciate
Thank
it,
you.
man.
Thanks.